Hello, friends, and welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast, where we focus on optimizing the well-being and best practices of insurance and financial professionals today. On this show, our objective is to help you optimize your life, optimize your profession, and learn from other optimized advisors. I'm your host, Scott Heinila. We hope you enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome. This is Scott Heinila, host of the Optimized Advisor Podcast. Today's show is all about optimizing our life. February is about what? February is about Valentine's Day. So in light of that, I have a few guests in studio today. First and foremost, Morgan Cutlip. Hello.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'll give you the proper introduction in just a moment. Also, thank you to Annie Cooper, who helps us with our social media and our podcast marketing, as she was the one that introduced me to you. So thank you, Annie, with AC Social Designs. We appreciate that. And certainly last but not least, I have a very special guest in studio today, my wife, Melissa.
Hello, thank you.
Hello. How long have we been married? 17 years. You can speak up too. Okay. Chime in here.
17 wonderful years.
As I stated, February is about Valentine's Day. Sidebar comment, a holiday you and I have not really been totally enamored with, and take our love and appreciation for each other in different ways, but we can maybe chat about that in a little bit. We are busy in our lives every day, every week. This is a show today, a topic that I really wanted to dive deeper in to learn more about being intentional as a couple. If we're running a business and we're parents with kids, and life just gets in the way more and more, even more with COVID and distractions and all of that. So how can we be intentional about continuing to date our spouse, take the time for each other? Definitely want to talk to you a little bit more about that, but let me do you a proper introduction. You are married. You are also a mother to, is it Effie?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. And Roy, a Ph.D. in psychology and lifelong lover of all things relationships. So we have a relationship expert right in front of us today. She develops online relationship courses and resources at Love Thinks and manages the blog at mylovethinks.com. Morgan also serves on the medical board for the Flow Tracker app, the #1 app in the health and fitness category, and advisory board for Friends with Rings. Wow. There's some good topics for us to dive into there. When you and I first started chatting, you mentioned a little bit. I did not know that you were involved in, the My Love Thinks and those initiatives. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about your practice, how you got into these different areas, and then we can go from there.
Honestly, it all starts when I was about 5 years old. My dad is also a doctorate in psychology, and went back to school when I was very young, and I started going to classes with him, and we would play a game in the car where he would give me a case of a client and ask me, I was probably 6 or 7 at the time, what would you do with this family? What would you do with this couple? What would you do with this little kid? And it became something I got really interested in from a young age, and my school just kind of followed course. And he had a practice for 25 years and started developing educational courses to teach people how to have healthy relationships. There is a vast amount of research out there on relationships. There's theory out there on relationships, but actually taking that stuff and translating it into practical tools is kind of where the space we exist in. So he started developing courses. I started traveling to conferences with him, speaking with him, teaching the courses, and then helping to develop future courses together. So we've worked together about 15 years in the space. Our courses have been used by all branches of the military, nonprofits, universities, high schools, government-funded coalitions, and so that's really what we do. So I do have a practice, but it's very small. I take on just a couple clients at a time, but really what I do is develop content using psychological theories and research and translate them into really practical things people can put to work in their lives.
Can you give us one specific example that, maybe has resonated with you recently, or something that, let's take Melissa and I, we've been married 17 years, and something that we either can take note of or just be deliberate about.
A specific example of something practical?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So recently I did a video on something I think a lot of spouses struggle with, which is one spouse might feel taken for granted. And maybe the other spouse is like, I don't even know, like, what the heck does that even mean? How do I fix that? So a practical approach to that would be boiling it down to two simple reasons why they might feel taken for granted, and then what is one simple solution to try to help your spouse? Or even if you're the one who feels taken for granted, how do you explain to your partner what you need? So somebody feeling taken for granted usually they need to feel valued and visible. So how do you do that? A simple, very quick little adjustment you can make is to start making observations about what your partner does. That's all that it takes. Hey, I see how much you've been taking on lately. I've been traveling a lot more for work. The kids have been just a handful lately. You've been doing more with the school. I just want you to know I see what you're doing. It accomplishes something in a really simple statement that is really massive that a lot of couples struggle with.
Interesting.
It's really good.
Do you have any thoughts or questions?
Not at this time.
Okay.
You are on the spot.
So one of the things that I was personally interested in to dive a little bit deeper in our topic of conversation today is being a good spouse, being a good husband. And with that, time is so scarce.
Yeah.
So, we're running a business. We are busy in our lives. We have 2 kids. When I get home, and same would be for Melissa, when we get home, you're pulled in all these different directions.
Yeah.
And naturally, everybody has this kind of selfish need, I would think. I'm interested in me time, but it's not me time, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So just things that we've done and do over the years that I think have helped us maintain a healthy relationship. Sidebar comment, how do you really know your relationship is really healthy? You kind of don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that we do, a little thing, we've devoted a week or a night every week to a date night. And it's one of those things where if it's not on the calendar, it probably won't happen.
Exactly.
So that would be one example of where we've been deliberate in our relationship to make sure that we make time for each other.
And I think what you're talking about is something that, like, you're preaching to the choir with what you're saying, because, this idea we talk a lot about in life. If we just find the balance, like, I'm just after balancing my work and my family and my me time and, my social media consumption, like all the things that we have to balance. And we're always kind of after that. And the thing is, though, is balance is a complete myth. Like, it's not a realistic standard, but what we should all be striving for is to be balancing. Everything, we have all these moving parts in our lives, and our relationships is one piece in the bigger picture of all the things that we're managing. And so, when you say things just kind of pull you apart, I think that's so accurate that, life just has this way of interrupting your ability to stay connected and close in your relationship. And so there's many means of doing this, and your guys' date night is an amazing means of doing this. But the bigger picture point is that, we have to be active managers of our relationships, however that looks for each couple. But to assume that we can manage our work schedule, our kids' schedules, our kids' education, all the things in life, we manage all those things. But then for some reason, we tend to operate with this belief that relationships will run themselves. And it sets you up to fail.
You have to work on them.
Yeah, you have to be really a participant in your relationships.
And to step out of, when he comes home, he's stepping out of his work role and everything that he's doing at work. And then I'm stepping out of, like, my home role and whatever work projects I've been doing that day. And wanting, our expectations of, where's dinner? Okay, do the kids have they had done homework so that we can have family time? And we actually just changed our date night of the week because Thursdays was not working. I still, we both were helping kids with homework, and we were leaving the kids with our babysitter, and I was worried about, are they going to finish? Are they going to study for the test the next day? And so I was just, no, we need to change our day of the week. It's now going to be Friday, so I can completely just step out of all roles, and he can step out of all roles except for spouse role, and just focusing on each other.
And you're bringing up like a really good point to this, which is, so you have to be active managers, and life's going to get in the way of our relationships. Life's going to throw us curveballs. The schedule is not working anymore. There's a job change, there's a relocation, there's all these things that will come at us in life that will cause our relationship to get kind of out of whack. Which is fine. Like, that's normal, and that's just part of life. Like, everything kind of is constantly moving. It's dynamic. However, when you're an active manager, you don't stay in that imbalanced state, but you come together and you make those adjustments, which is what you guys did, which is, listen, we need this date night as a priority, but it's just not working on Thursdays. I'm not even enjoying it probably because I'm distracted by worrying about the kids. It's too stressful. So what do? You tweak, you adjust, you figure it out, and you're managing your relationship. So you guys are like such a beautiful example of how to do that well.
So let me ask this question, like, what is a relationship?
Yeah.
To me, there's multiple facets to what a relationship is. And you tell us, but emotional, physical, I guess there's probably a financial aspect of being in a relationship. And I don't know what the others are, but also, how do you be deliberate and intentional about the balancing of the different facets of a relationship?
So, all right. So, I mean,
because I've read this
so long about it.
So I've read, like, I always have heard,
Yeah.
as an example, the two main reasons people get divorced is sexual connection and financial reasons.
So those are the two biggest arguments.
Oh.
But no,
Okay.
but people always think that people get divorced because of finances or sex. The most commonly cited reason that I've seen in the research, when you look at like what people, when they say, why did you divorce? It's growing apart or falling out of love. So it comes back to how well are you managing your relationship, because a lot of times there are these slow things that start to erode at the closeness in your relationship, and either it's like this slow leak that leads to this flat relationship, or it becomes this big blowout where something happens down the road.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, of slow leaks?
I mean, I'm sure there's many.
There's so many of slow leaks, you're saying?
Right.
So, I mean, feeling invisible, having needs that go unmet repeatedly, feeling like your partner doesn't support you, feeling like the relationship is inequitable or unfair, you're doing more than your partner, feeling like you don't. I mean, needs is like a big category, right? Like, right. You aren't seen, you aren't valued. I mean, it just not enough sex. I mean, there's so many reasons.
And so personal.
So personal,
Yeah.
and ultimately, what leads to resentment, leads to disconnection. But I'm going to go back to your question about what's a relationship.
Yes, please.
So this is really getting at the heart of what's in our courses. So in the 80s, my dad developed a model. It's an interactive model. It'd be better, I should have brought one with me. But it's a picture of a relationship. So a relationship is
it on
online?
a website? Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
Can we find it later?
What's your website? Or maybe
I'm
Daniel
trying
can
to
pull
think
it up.
where it would be.
Insert it later.
He's very protective of it, so he
Oh,
doesn't
okay,
No,
never
you can
mind.
show
Yeah,
it, but I'm just
okay.
saying, he doesn't always put it out there very often on our sites. But it's so a relationship is a connection. Try ramseries.com. See if there might be one there. A relationship is a connection, but then it's like, okay, so what are the connections? So we have a model that is the foundation of every single course that we have. It's called the Relationship Attachment Model, and it talks about 5 bonding connections that exist in every type of relationship. We're talking your relationship with your kids, relationship with coworkers, friends, and your partner. And so the 5 areas are knowing, so know, how well you know each other, how you stay in the know, how you get to know each other, how you kind of nurture that. I can draw it for you too. Trust, is the next one. Trust is like your opinion of someone else. It's like it's a cognitive thing. It's like a sketch in your head of what you, or a caricature of how you think about and what you believe about somebody else. So if you think about like caricatures of presidents, right? Obama's has like big ears. Trump's has like that crazy hair. A lot of times in our relationships, we sketch a caricature of the person we're in a relationship with, and then we zero in or we focus in on certain parts of that person, and they kind of move to the foreground and other parts move into the background. This is how you can get into a bad attitude about your partner, right? When you're like, start focusing in on, for example, like feeling disrespected. Every sock on the floor, every underwear on the floor, every wet towel, everything that they don't do is just further evidence that they are this disrespectful partner.
You never pick up anything.
Exactly. So many people can relate to that. So this is what the model looks like. So the next one is rely. This is how you meet each other's needs. So these are like the exchanges. So trust is, again, like more mental, and rely is these exchanges. So how do you meet each other's needs? How do you show up for each other? How do you listen to each other and use supportive communication? Then commitment. So commitment is like, the label of your relationship, of course, but it's also like how you prioritize each other. It's the resilient part of the relationship. How do you persevere through tough times? A lot of times when couples are going through a major betrayal or some sort of issue in their relationship, it's like you're so heavily reliant on the commitment because everything else is like kind of messed up, right? So it pulls you through. And then the last one is touch. So that can be, so if you imagine it, it's like an equilibrium, like a stereo, right? And there's levels. So touch can be anything from like affectionate touch with your kids. Think about when they're little and they get hurt and all they want is you to hold them and give them a hug and touch them, and all the way to your sexual relationship and marriage. And so how we talk about it, what are you managing? You're managing these 5 levels. Because different combinations of each of these levels will produce different feelings and experiences in your relationship. So, and when we talk about becoming imbalanced, I'm talking about in many ways these levels. If you can imagine, after a baby comes into the picture, maybe you're like, I don't even really know my partner anymore. Now that she's a mom, I don't know the side of her, so you have to get to know them. The baby's
the touch aspect of it between husband and wife completely changes.
Right? The touch is so different.
Now you have somebody else touching you all the time.
All day. You're like, stop touching me.
Yeah.
Right? So these things become imbalanced, which is normal, again. But if they stay imbalanced, that's when relationships become vulnerable. So that's where we have to be active managers because they don't self-correct. We have to intentionally manage these parts of our relationship. So that's what our marriage course is about.
That's important to understand. Like, it's okay for them to get out of balance. It's okay to have life be messy and we're not totally in sync in one area of this model.
Exactly.
But that you can say and then adjust.
Exactly.
Because everyone needs, thinks about like perfection right now. Like I need to be, the best mom and the best wife and like the most in shape and all the things that society expects of us. And then it's the same for him in same and different ways. And so just to know that life is messy and it's not always going to be, it's going to be imbalanced and imperfect and there's going to be challenges and then you just adjust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But what about, today's environment? It's like, okay, I recognition is certainly part of it. Mm-hmm. But if you've been in a relationship for a long time, sometimes recognition is there, but then how do you create the willingness to change?
You're asking such profound questions.
That's him.
The willingness to change in a partner?
Right.
This is our
because remember, it's February.
By the way, like every time. It's like super in depth. Like,
I love it.
It's February, Valentine's.
I mean, the reality is that sometimes you can't. And that's like the bad news. So if anyone's listening who's not married, okay, if I were to say what's the most important quality to look for in a partner, I would say changeability. Changeability is the number one thing to look for because if you're with a partner who is like, whatever comes up, they can hear your feedback, they will take it in, and they'll do something about it. That is somebody you want to hold on to. Because that's a big deal. When you're married to somebody who is like dig their heels in, gets defensive, it creates a more hostile relationship. It creates more just negative tone to your overall relationship. And so that's a really important thing. I think also, to not completely wipe out all hope for people who are like, my partner doesn't change. Relationships are dynamic. And so when one person does something a bit differently, it affects the whole. And so my advice would be there are things you can do as an individual that can start to change the dynamic in your relationship. And I know like a lot of times when I work with couples, when you start peeling back really the layers of what's going on in the relationship, and maybe both of them are kind of at a standoff, you find that's like, it's not one-sided. There is some dynamic that's at play here that's kind of leading to these issues. So if one person makes a change, it changes the whole. So there's hope for you there.
The other thing too, in just today's society, everything's so instant gratification. Mm-hmm. So we have this conversation. I recognize, I'm out of balance in one of these areas, and tomorrow I expect this dramatic change, as opposed to accepting the fact that no, we identify and we've got to kind of redirect course.
Yeah.
But what are some practices that a couple, whether or not they're married or not, right, can recognize, and what is a process that they can kind of go through without always needing a therapist or just amongst themselves?
So if there was one thing, because there's all these like micro skills, right, you can talk about and teach. If there's one thing, it would be to schedule a regular check-in. I was thinking about, we talked in our conversation before about financial advisors and how sometimes their personalities are maybe not as conducive to having like happy, loving relationships, or they're a bit type A. And the more I thought about it, it's like, that's a perfect. That's a great skill set to apply to your relationships. If we're going to be managers of our relationships, let's take those strengths at work and transfer them to be of really good use at home. So schedule a regular, whether it's a date night or it's a check-in. Actually, it would probably be separate from a date night. A check-in where you come together and you touch base on how you're doing. So how am I doing meeting your needs? Are there any needs that you feel like you've really been wanting that have been going unmet? How's your attitude towards me? It seems like I'm picking up on something. Like, is there something that's been bothering you? Can we talk about it and make sure we're not making any assumptions that are wrong? How's our sex life been? Has X, Y, and Z been interrupting that lately? What can we do to kind of move the dial on our sex life? So stay on top of stuff so that you don't have these little issues that are just eroding at the closeness of your relationship, that before you know it, it's like 5 years have gone by and they've become huge issues that are so just embedded in the fabric of your relationship that you don't even know, how to go about repairing them.
And what can you, that requires you really kind of letting your vulnerability be present and accepting. I don't know how to put it exactly, but maybe you're in a situation where you're recognizing something, but even you're afraid to mention it, or you're not sure how the spouse, the partner will respond in this kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Are there ways that you can communicate this that will help?
Well,
or an example of a couple, a relationship that you've had that you recognized one of these areas that was way out of balance, and how you either helped that couple through that, or a relationship that you had that you can say, okay, this is how I approached it, and this is what I did.
Yeah. Yes. So, first of all, I'd say it does take a little bit of vulnerability. The check-ins that I'm suggesting, I think, should be really structured, because you want to keep having them. So if they're terrible and painful and you end up in an argument, it's never going to happen. I don't want to do that again. No, right. You're like, there's this belief that we only talk about our relationships when they're sucking. And so we need to get in the practice of talking about them when things are good. And so that's part of what these meetings would do. So keep them short, keep them positive, keep having them. So then to your question, I think it does take some vulnerability, but I think also a lot of times, it's not like your spouse is in the dark, your partner's not in the dark. If you bring something up, it's likely something that they've been experiencing and feeling too, and will feel relieved that it's finally on the table. If there's one skill that I think is the most helpful in handling really tricky and difficult discussions, I call it the defense attorney technique, where essentially one person explains all of that they want to explain. They plead their case, they say whatever it is, they open their heart, anything. And let's say it takes 5 minutes. The other partner doesn't respond to anything that the other partner said, but instead they speak for 5 minutes, re-explaining it back. And not like, so I hear you saying, that's kind of annoying and condescending, but just like, okay, if I'm understanding you, this is what I'm hearing, and this feels like this to you. And so a lot of times when we get in a discussion with our partner, we talk and we plead our case, and we can go on and on and on and on. And then our partner, if they even say it back to us to let us know that they understood, it's like 20 seconds. And so try to match the amount of time, and that will set up a foundation of mutual understanding and listening and respect to that conversation right off the get-go.
That's good.
Yeah, that is great. So transitioning a little bit,
Sure.
We did talk about how, our clientele and our predominant customer force is financial advisors, they're type A personalities, they're drivers, they're ambitious, they're motivated, they're trying to drive to a goal. Time is very, very scarce. And, we have children. And we do want to be a good husband, and we want to be intentional, and we want to have a good family life and good balance, but we also have our personal interests of whatever those hobbies may be, and that's how we kind of relieve our stress and clear our mind and all these things. One of the things that I think parents also at large just get distracted by, and you and I read a book a long time ago, Melissa, I forget what the name of the book was, but it was recognizing the fact that when children are now entered into the equation, the relationship of husband and wife take a back seat.
Was that positive parenting? Positive.
It was one of those parenting.
Yeah, one of the many parenting
Yeah.
books.
Join the
At
club.
12 o'clock at night, like, what are we doing? I can't help us.
And with that, it resonated with us that
Essentially said we're putting us first, and if we're okay, then our kids are okay, and we're okay. Everybody's okay.
And that was very profound for us at that point in time, because it was like, you know what? Yes, we have the right to be selfish as a couple and prioritize us first. And that doesn't mean that we're bad parents.
I think it's like the opposite,
It's the
because
opposite.
now our son James is 11 and Jack is 8, and they see us prioritizing each other. So, for example, our last date night, Mom usually is more dressed up than the usual, pajamas they see me in or whatever at night when they come home from school. And they see me, get my hair ready and my makeup. And I always ask them, how does Mommy's makeup look tonight? And I want them to know that Mommy's taking, care of herself and wants to look good for Dad. And they're an active participant, when we go out, and they know that we're going for date night and that's important to us.
And it's interesting because I can remember when we first started doing that, it was like, no, you're not. Why are you leaving me?
Mm-hmm.
But now it's gotten to the point where like, yeah, it's date night.
Yeah.
And they're proud of that,
I think it's really important. I think the millennial generation, for example, is like the generation now of young kids. And when you look at the research on them, they're like very invested in parenting, which is wonderful. However, I think it can go a little too far sometimes. So it's just something to watch out for, which is so invested in the kids, so invested in the parenting, not as much on the partnering and on the partners. And so what you've done is really smart. I think a lot of people struggle with that, what's more important, the relationship or the kids, and easily fall into that pattern of the kids coming first. But it's lost, though, like how much kids, you're touching on it. It's so important how much kids learn by watching how you do your relationship. You have 2 sons, right? Your sons are learning how to take care of their future partner, how they watch you. They're looking at what to expect in a future partner. They're learning very big and important lessons that will affect their future through watching how you guys take care of one another and show each other love and prioritize each other, and it's going to impact their relationships into adulthood. So it's so important. The relationship that you have is the foundation for so many other things in your life, and kids is one piece of them, but so many other things. And so it's really important that it's prioritized, that there's a high level of importance on taking care of and nurturing your relationship.
Yeah. I was telling the boys this morning when we were having breakfast, I was saying, yeah, Mom and Dad have date night tomorrow night. And, we really want to just like each other by the time you guys leave the house. And that's really important to us. And they're like, what do you mean? Like when we leave the house, when you go to college and we have to still like each other.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot. I was saying the reasons people say they got divorced, right, is growing apart. What the heck does that even mean? Falling out of love. How does that happen? It happens because life gets busy, it gets in the way. There are these irritations that build over time, these frustrations, these hurts, and they've accumulated to be this massive thing that feels like you can't deal with it by the time your kids are grown. And so you're doing a good job taking care of your relationship in that way.
What are some other things that let's transition a little bit like a work relationship. Using the example of a check-in, to me, that's pretty common in the workplace.
Totally.
Whether you're a manager, the boss, sales, whatever the role is, right? It's like, we're going to sit down, have a little check-in. How are things going? What are we doing? Mm-hmm. But to allow yourself to be vulnerable and intimate with your partner, we talked a little bit about that and how you can kind of just let the guard down and be willing to have that communication, something like that. But what other practices can a couple do to be intentional, to help foster their relationship that you can share?
So in my mind, I'm such a big picture thinker. So I think that these check-ins will help to guide where that needs to go. So when you think about prioritizing your partner, the key is to do it in the way that they need. So love your partner and the way that they like to be loved. We tend to love people and our partners the way we like to be loved and the ways that are most comfortable for us. And so I think it's really important to, it's like you got to be an expert of your partner.
So the 5 love languages.
Yeah, you can use that as an example. I think,
So what are those for the audience that may not know?
5, okay, oh boy.
Melissa knows this.
Acts of service. Go ahead.
Physical touch, quality time.
Acts of service. Words of
affirmation,
and gifts.
And gifts, right.
And gifts.
Melissa is definitely quality time.
Yeah. And
that becomes a challenge at times. Just as a little example, how are we going to find a time to go on vacation together, which we haven't done I don't know quite a while.
So are you holiday time too? You want my time?
I do. Absolutely. But how do you learn what your language is even?
Well, your own language,
it seems duh. But
no, it's not though, because a lot of people don't know. Especially they don't know their partners. So one way of figuring out your own is to just pay attention to the way that you take care of your partner. So mine, I don't know what mine is in terms of 5 level. I guess it's more words, but more it's words of visibility and seeing them or whatever. So when my husband starts to feel kind of upset about something at work, I'm there with a pep talk that will just knock your socks off. It's so good. And I get done and I'm yeah, high five myself. I just did good by my husband. And he's yeah, okay. And it's like this blow. And so one, obviously could take it very personally, but what in our discussions as a couple, it's like, that doesn't do it for me. That does it for you. And so that's why you like to give that, but that's not your thing. For my husband, it would be more like, let's like do something for me. Like I remember once I like weeded the whole kind of like front of our house. It was so gnarly. And it was like, I got months of mileage out of that. I was like, okay, I'm sorry, but your love language takes a lot of time. Like, so that's something to pay attention to. How do you love your partner? That's usually what you want. Yes, and touch. Most men. I mean, it's stereotype, but for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big one. I think that also if you can pay attention to your partner, what are they complaining about? Kind of shed some light on also, what they need and what kind of what love language or whatever does it for them. So what do they complain about? How do they love you is another way of figuring out theirs. And then you just ask them, what do you need? What do you need more of? What can I do for you? What really fills you up and does it for you? And that's
That's not easy.
It's not easy, but kind of it is.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Just ask the question.
I mean, wouldn't you rather be efficient? I bet you'd rather be more targeted in how you take care of your partner.
It's easier for women because we're more intuitive.
But that's a two-way street. You ask the question.
They want to do well by you, and they want to know, but they need to be told.
Yeah.
A lot of the times.
Yeah.
But asking is only half of the equation. It's also up to the partner to be willing to provide an unfettered, honest response.
That's true.
I mean, and maybe I don't know the answer. I don't know how to answer that.
So it can be just a process, right, of talking about it and revisiting it. And I think that's, in our course for couples, we talk about being a connoisseur of your partner, like how you would wine or something, where it's like you study it and you love it and you read about it. Like you just like you get into it. And it's like, do that for your partner. Pay attention. What do you notice that they're really into? When they do something for themselves, how do they take care of themselves? I feel like my husband, this has been like the conversation of our relationship forever. And we met when I was 14. And I'm not going to say how old I am, but we've been married for a while. But is he's not good with words, and words is what I need. But if you look back, I have cards that he made for me in high school. So there are always these, I save everything he ever writes to me. There are clues that will lead you to figure out what's going on with your partner and what you can do with him.
You.
Right. Right. But even today, any card, I mean, I think I have every card he's ever given me.
That's pretty cool.
The words matter to me.
Yeah. We do something, we did. We need to get back to it. That's a good reminder, actually. I forgot.
After 17 years.
Yeah, every Christmas we would not do gifts. Mm-hmm. Neither one of our love languages really is gifts. So we would write a letter to each other. That's nice. And then give it to each other. And I think the last time we did it was last Christmas. We needed it probably this Christmas the most after that year. But to have those to look back on over the years is pretty special.
That's really special.
Yeah, but you would like that.
I would love that. Mm-hmm. Maybe he will listen to this
tradition.
Podcast
and
take note.
Yeah.
I think you keep kind of bringing up this idea of, it being scary and vulnerable to have these conversations that are a bit more intimate and a bit more intense. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I keep kind of like pushing this idea of having these check-ins, because the more used to having sit-down conversations with your partner, or don't even sit down. Go like play basketball and have a conversation, or go for a walk and have a conversation. But the more you get used to getting in this practice, the easier it will become to just kind of naturally check in with each other about these things and talk about stuff that feels a little bit scary at first. So you're sort of like, anytime there's anxiety around something, you kind of like want to approach that anxiety. It makes it smaller. So you just want to keep exposing yourself to these conversations.
We're going to go for a walk and we're going to have a check-in. And then you say, okay, we're checking in. And so how are you in the know and the trust and the all of it?
Like, is there anything I've been missing that's been going on with you that I don't know about? How's my attitudes kind of like this sort of bothered me the other day, but I'm not sure if that's how you meant it. Like, can you check check that out. Can I check that against your reality? Are we missing each other on that? How am I doing meeting your needs? How are we prioritizing each other and our family? Are we kind of out of balance there? Is it too much kids, not enough us, not enough, whatever? And then how are we doing in our sex life and our intimate relationships? You kind of just like march your way right through each of those, and it's a structured meeting to have with your partner.
I think that's great. On a lighter note, to just chat a little bit regarding dating your spouse or dating your partner, and I'll do it with this. I think one of the funnest kind of impromptu dates we had, which was a number of years ago, where we just went to the court. This was before you really started to take up golf, but it was like, let's just go get a glass of wine. We'll run into the clubhouse. We'll ask them if they have a couple putters, and we spent an hour probably putting on the green and then had a nice dinner. And it was just a really fun date where we connected. It wasn't the typical, let's just go to a restaurant or go to a movie and get in that mundane process to try and avoid that. So be deliberate, be intentional, think outside the box, try and create an experience with your partner that is a little bit different. It is unique.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. And I know it sounds like you would read it, in like a magazine, like go have fun together. It sounds very like cliche to say, but there's something that's really important about that. And I think a lot of couples, when you really take a moment and go, when's the last time we like just had fun together? It sometimes can be really hard to remember. And so experiences like that are really powerful for a relationship.
Yeah.
Do you have a date in mind that you remember?
Well, we can go back to that golf date. That sounds fun again. A walk on the beach because we live by one. And that sounds nice.
Or even different things like we've talked about going to the shooting range.
Yeah, that's one we keep talking about too, when we haven't gone yet. But
maybe we'll do a double date. Yeah.
That'd be fun. Some of our best dates are like going to play pool or darts, just like something really random, but just
something you don't do
together.
All the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll school you on a game of basketball later.
Yeah, right. So we also talked when we initially dialogued before the show about divorce and some of the things that certainly our advisors, right? They're dealing with clients and dealing with clients and spouses. In many cases, divorce occurs. And some advisors find themselves right smack dab in the middle of a bitter divorce that they didn't plan on in their practice. They didn't plan on being, I'm a financial advisor. I just want to manage people's money.
Yeah.
But here I am. I'm now in the middle of it, and my client might be the one where they don't have the financial experience and they're dealing with such emotional challenges. What are things that an advisor can do directly, or are there resources that exist for them to reach out to a book or anything that can help them be better equipped to deal with a client of theirs that is going through divorce?
So I have just some quick suggestions. I think, one, have a plan in place before it happens. So if you're an advisor and this hasn't happened yet to you in your practice, then think about it and think about how you want to handle it. I think that this goes even for dating relationships. It's kind of like an offshoot point, but a lot of times we come up with boundaries in the moment. And when you come up with boundaries in the moment, it's really easy to kind of push past the original boundary because you're being pulled into something. And I think that an advisor sitting with somebody who's struggling through a divorce can be really pulled into that person's experience. So have a plan in place before, think about it before, think about how you want to handle it. Stay in your lane would be my second point. You're not a therapist. This isn't your training. You're going to be pulled out of your lane. I think sometimes, especially men tend to be fixers. And so I think it's really common to hear somebody struggling and kind of get caught up in it and want to provide answers and solutions. And so, stay in your lane. It's okay to stay in your lane. You don't have to do everything for this person. And
I think it's important. That's a very important point of staying in your lane, but also trying to not be abrupt, right? As a male advisor, exactly. I could be very abrupt about that and not sensitive to the situation that you're in. but maybe crafting it in a way that's somewhat diplomatic. You're sensitive to how they're feeling.
Yes.
This is not an area of expertise I'm comfortable with. Or I don't
So
know exactly.
this is my
but-
formula. It's a statement of empathy, a restatement of the purpose of your relationship and your meeting. So it goes like this. It goes something like, wow, like I know this is such an overwhelming and emotional time for you. Empathy. You're not being abrupt. You're not being cold. I'm really glad that you're here and we're figuring out this one piece of it. I'm hoping that organizing your finances and getting all this stuff straightened out will take something off of your plate and at least provide a little bit of calm in a really difficult time. You are staying in your lane. You're being warm. You're being kind, but you are not venturing into advice. You're not siding with anybody. You're just saying, I am a financial advisor. We're here to figure out your finances. I'm really hoping this helps you. And just keep redirecting the conversation back to the purpose of your relationship with this person, which is their financial advisor.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And I'm sure advisors face that on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
What are the statistics of divorce today? And
I haven't looked at that in a while,
okay.
actually. I know, it was around 53% before, but I know people are, it's gone down. So I just know the trend is that it's gone down, but also less people are getting married. So people are choosing, cohabitation and things like that instead of marriage.
Right. Yeah, that's dramatically changing in just how couples exist today. And I think will continue to dramatically change in the future.
I think so too.
COVID has also played a very, I'm sure, dramatic impact in just parenting and relationships in general. Hopefully we getting on the other side of that, but I'm sure, and I think it's early to tell, but what the impact will be of households being just locked in.
Yeah, it's funny. So we work a lot with the military, and so I've done some research before with female soldiers, and have read a lot of the research on the military many years ago, but I have read it. And I think a really interesting finding that comes out of that literature is about deployments and divorce. What they find, a lot of people say, well, deployments cause divorce. Okay, that's not what the research says. Research says that if you have a relationship that is already kind of vulnerable, put it in a deployment, it's likely not going to go well, and it's common sense, right? And then it's going to come back and higher chance of divorce, higher likelihood of divorce. If you have a relationship that's relatively healthy, usually they weather a deployment pretty well. Of course, you might have some things come up, but mostly they're fine after. And I think we've kind of like seen this with COVID, is it's just like been this pressure cooker for relationships that were maybe there were some things under the surface that were going on, and having all this concentrated time together and our schedules and everything flipped upside down. It's fast tracked the deterioration of some people's relationships, which is really sad.
Yeah, and the other one we've seen too is, this is pre-COVID, but a family that has 2 or 3 kids and maybe their relationship's a little stressed, and then they think we'll have another child.
Oh, like it's a cliche for don't do it. Yeah.
And then next thing you know, they're getting a divorce and they've got a child.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's an answer, but it's like, how do you be aware of that? And
yeah, so I did like a webinar actually on marriage after kids, because kids really do highlight vulnerabilities in a relationship. So if you're not good before, you're going to be probably a little bit worse after.
Maybe get a pet before you I don't know the answer, but these are just thoughts I have.
You want to establish some good relationship practices beforehand. Be in a good spot before you add more to your plate. For men, the biggest issue after kids when you look at the research, tends to be the financial pressure, the worry about providing, and the change in sex life. That's what affects their happiness the most. For women, it's a change of roles, loss of freedom, and increase of responsibility. So start there. Start talking about your change in roles. Start talking about how you're going to manage responsibilities differently when there's a ton more on your plate. How are you going to navigate your sex life? Have some of those difficult conversations that people really like to avoid, but yet that you need to have. And talk about your meet with a financial advisor.
So how do you do that? The sexual conversation and approaching that and the needs of the partner, and whether you're married or not, just how do you help make that conversation more available, I guess would be, or more comfortable as a
Okay,
couple?
so let's do the sex conversation. Maybe that will be the most interesting. So, specifically talk about these things. So, if you and your partner have different desires for sex, which is almost always the case, usually one wants it more than the other, talk about how do we handle the difference in our desires. So, when one person's in the mood, how does the other person want to be approached? Talk about that. Talk about when you're not feeling it, how does this partner want to be told no? What are acceptable ways to say no that the one person can feel comfortable saying and the other partner can handle without getting pouty or resentful? Talk about, how often is enough and what works for you. I mean, sex lives are really about what works for the couple. There's not really any norms when you look at research about like what is the perfect amount of sex. It's really what works for each couple. So have these conversations. I mean, the biggest issue with sex is one wants it more, one doesn't want it as much, and then there's that sort of standoff then, and somebody ends up getting hurt or frustrated.
Right. Yeah, that's good. It's a very important part of any relationship. It's not just time. It's not just being able to be vulnerable to each other. These are important elements.
Yes.
We've learned a lot today. We thank you for your time.
Yeah.
In recap, some things that can be takeaways. 1, don't stop dating your partner. Be deliberate about it. Don't be boring or monotonous about it. The 5, what do we call these?
The relationship model.
Yes, it's the relationship attachment model, but it's the 5 connections in a relationship, the 5
Have
bonds.
a regular check-in with your partner and have this dialogue and discussion. We've not been big fans of Valentine's Day, but have at it if that's your day. Buy your chocolate and whatever you'd like. That's a whole separate conversation for another day, but that's a fun one. How can people find you?
Yes, so you can find me on Instagram, where almost all of my posts are just practical things you can do, and my handle is mylovethinks. We also have a blog, mylovethinks.com, and we have
What can they find on the blog?
So on the blog, just longer articles, blog posts about, some of these topics. I go more in depth than you can do in like a square on Instagram, even though I put a lot in those squares, but more stuff on the blog. Also, there's a lot of free resources. So, I hear a lot from especially my male followers, which is a small population. I'm hoping that changes, but I don't even know what to talk about with my partner. So I have things on the blog that are like conversation starters that aren't how was your day, tons of different free resources. And then also we have several courses, and you can find those through the blog or at online.mylovethinks.com.
This is all about optimizing your life to be a better and more intentional partner, father, business person. Hopefully this was enlightening for some. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Until next time.